That electronic signal is a sign for you to change slides. When you next hear it, show your first slide on the screen. Jerusalem, sacred to the three monotheistic religions, is built upon several hills. For the Christians, it is the city where Jesus taught, was condemned, crucified, resurrected, and ascended into heaven. For the Jews, it is the city of the first and second temples. For the Muslims, it is the third holiest city after Mecca and Medina, and the place where the Prophet Muhammad ascended into heaven. Jerusalem has more than 4,000 years of history. In 2000 BC, Melchizedek, king of Jerusalem, welcomed Abraham, who came to offer his son Isaac for sacrifice on Mount Moriah. In 1003 BC, David captured Jerusalem from the Jebusites, made it his capital, and brought the Ark of the Law to Mount Moriah. Between 961 and 922 BC, Solomon, David's son, built the first temple. In 587 BC, Nebuchadnezzar captured and destroyed the city and exiled its people to Babylon. In 517 BC, the second temple was rebuilt over the ruins of the first. In 322 BC, Alexander the Great captured Jerusalem. In 63 BC, Pompey captured Jerusalem and the Roman rule began. In 37 BC, Herod assumed power, rebuilt Jerusalem and the temple. During his reign, Jesus was born. In the year 30, Jesus was crucified. In the years 66 to 70 AD, the Jewish revolt against Rome. In 70 AD, Jerusalem was destroyed by Titus and a new city was built over the ruins. In 135 AD, Hadrian, the Roman general, destroyed Jerusalem completely, rebuilt a new one and called it Aelia Capitolina. In the Byzantine era, the 4th to the 7th centuries, Emperor Constantine built many churches in the area. In 614 AD, the Persians conquered the country and destroyed its churches. In 637 AD, the Caliph Omar entered Jerusalem and the Arab rule for the next 500 years began. In 1099 AD, the Crusaders conquered the area and ruled it for 200 years. In 1187 AD, Jerusalem fell to Saladin. During the Ottoman rule, from 1517 to 1917, the walls of Jerusalem were rebuilt by Suleiman the Magnificent. Then came Britain from 1917 to 1948, and the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan until 1967. Since 1967, Jerusalem is ruled by Israel. The way of the cross is the road trodden by Jesus from the Praetorium to Calvary. Some stations are related in the Gospels, while others are traditional. The way of the cross is lined with churches marking the stations of the cross. This palace fortress was built by Herod and named Antonia after his friend Mark Antony. It was the seat of the Roman procurators in the country. Part of the Antonia was covered with a paved courtyard, Lithostrosus in Greek, Gabata in Aramaic. This courtyard is paved with large stones, striated with grooves that prevented horses from slipping. The Lithostrosus is the site of the Praetorium, or the judgment hall, where Jesus was brought before Pontius Pilate, tried, and condemned to death. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is the most sacred in the Christian world. When rebuilding Jerusalem, Hadrian, in 135 AD, obliterated the places of Christian faith and constructed Roman temples dedicated to Roman gods. A statue of Jupiter stood on Calvary, and a temple dedicated to Venus was built over the tomb. In 335 AD, Constantine removed Hadrian's temples and constructed a basilica, which was destroyed along with other churches by the Persians in 614 AD. In 1009 AD, the basilica was destroyed by Sultan Hakim, The facade has two doors. The one on the right has been closed since the time of Saladin. The other door has been under the custody of two Muslim families since 1426. One of the families keeps the key, whilst the other family has the right to open the door. The 10th station, where Jesus was stripped of his garments. The 11th, where Jesus was nailed to the cross. The 12th, where Jesus died on the cross. The 13th station, where the body of Jesus was taken down from the cross. And the 14th station, where Jesus was laid in the sepulchre. After being tried and sentenced to death, Jesus was led unto a place called Golgotha, that is to say, a place of a skull. Calvary was a rocky knoll. Its bare and round shape resembled a skull. It was outside the city walls, for, as we read in the Gospel according to St. John, the place where Jesus was crucified was nigh to the city. Calvary was included within the city walls by Herod Agrippa in 44 AD. The right chapel belongs to the Latins and marks the 10th and 11th stations of the cross. The altar was a gift from Ferdinand de Medici. The walls and ceiling are decorated with mosaics. This chapel on Calvary belongs to the Greeks and marks the 12th station of the cross. The altar stands upon the rock which held the cross of Jesus. An opening under the altar marks the place where the cross was fixed. Two black marble stones on each side of the altar mark the places where the crosses of the two thieves stood. On the right of the altar is a rent in the rock that was caused by an earthquake when Jesus died. Between the two chapels stands a Franciscan altar, which marks the 13th station of the cross, dedicated to Our Lady of the Sorrows. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new sepulchre wherein was never man yet laid. There laid they Jesus, therefore, because of the Jews' preparation day, for the sepulchre was nigh at hand. The sepulchre belonged to Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man, a member of the Sanhedrin, and a secret disciple of Jesus. We read of him in all four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is the 14th station of the cross. The facade is decorated with lamps and icons. The tomb is divided into two chambers. The first chamber is called the Chapel of the Angel, because the angel sitting on the stone announced the resurrection. He announced it to the holy women, saying, "He is not here, for he is risen." A low and narrow entrance leads to the holy tomb. To the right is a marble slab that covers the rock-hewn tomb in which Jesus was laid. The Temple Mount is dominated by the Dome of the Rock, also known as the Mosque of Omar. It is the third ranking after the Kaaba in Mecca and the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad in Medina. It was built by the Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan in 691 AD by Byzantine artists. His aim was to make Jerusalem the center of Islam instead of Mecca. For this reason, he built the most beautiful mosque in the Islamic world. Inside the mosque is the rock of Mount Moriah, sacred to Muslims and to Jews. This rock is known as the Foundation Rock. It marks the summit of Mount Moriah where Abraham was prepared to sacrifice his son Isaac. It was here that King David erected his altar, and the site where Solomon's temple once stood. To Muslims, it is the site from which the Prophet Muhammad ascended into heaven. Beneath the rock of Mount Moriah is the grotto where Abraham, David, Solomon, and the Prophet Muhammad prayed. There are 4 gates around the Dome of the Rock, each facing the 4 points of the compass. The dome is covered and decorated with mosaics and Persian tiles. Kufic Arabic with quotations from the Quran run along the upper edge of the Dome of the Rock. The interior of the Dome of the Rock is lit by the sun's rays passing through stained glass windows, some of which date back to the time of Suleiman the Magnificent. The floor is covered with carpets of green and red. The veined marble columns are from the ruins of the city destroyed by the Persians in 614 AD. The bases and the capitals are unequal, being taken from different Byzantine structures, and some even have crosses carved upon them. The silver-domed Mosque of Al-Aqsa, the Edge, is built on the southern edge of the Temple Mount. It was built by the Umayyad Caliph Al-Waleed ibn Abdul Malik between 709 and 715 AD. It was destroyed many times by earthquakes, but always rebuilt. With the capture of Jerusalem by the Crusaders in 1099, the mosque was converted into the headquarters of the Templar Knights. Jerusalem fell to Saladin in 1187, and Al-Aqsa was converted back to a mosque. A mihrab was added, and a minbar, or pulpit, carved from cedar wood and ivory, was brought by Saladin from Aleppo. King Solomon's stables lie under the pinnacle of the temple at the southeast corner of the Temple Mount. The huge vaults date back to the first temple and are supported by pillars. Crusader work is apparent in the upper parts of these pillars. In the 12th century, these vaults were used as stables by the kings of Jerusalem and by the Templars. The Western Wall is the holiest place in the Jewish world. It is the last relic of the Second Temple, restored by King Herod. This was one of the walls that supported Herod's temple. The temple was destroyed by the Roman Emperor Titus in 70 AD, and the Jews were forbidden to enter the city. It was in the days of the Byzantines, between the 4th and 7th centuries, that Jews were permitted once a year, on the 9th day of the month of Av, the day of the destruction of the temple, to approach the Western Wall and to mourn its destruction. Thus, it got its name, the Wailing Wall. The old city of Jerusalem has 8 gates around its walls. 7 of them are open. These are St. Stephen's Gate, or the Lion's Gate, the Golden Gate, which is closed, the Dung Gate, the Zion Gate, the Jaffa Gate, the New Gate, the Damascus Gate, and Herod's Gate, or the Gate of the Flowers. This is the Golden Gate, a Byzantine structure dating back to the 7th century and built over the eastern entrance of the Second Temple. According to tradition, this is the gate through which Jesus made his triumphal entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. In 810 AD, it was walled up by the Arabs and was opened twice a year during the Crusader period. In 1530, it was blocked completely by the Turks. It was added to the city walls by Suleiman the Magnificent in 1540. St. Stephen's Gate was built around 1539 to 1540 by Suleiman the Magnificent. Today, it is the only entrance to the city from its eastern side. It is believed to be the work of 2 brothers who started at the Jaffa Gate and ended here by putting lions on either side. They seem to be the coat of arms of Sultan Bibars. The Damascus Gate was built by Suleiman the Magnificent. This is Jerusalem's most ornate gate and is a fine example of 16th century architecture. It is one of the main entrances to the old city and the most busy. Since the 7th century, Arabs call it Bab al-Amud, the Gate of the Pillar, because of a pillar raised by Hadrian in 135 AD, and it appears in the 6th century mosaic map of Madaba. It is called the Damascus Gate because this was the beginning of the road that led to the north, to Damascus. David's Tower is one of Jerusalem's landmarks, usually called David's Tower after the big tower next to the entrance. It was built by Herod, surrounded by walls and protected by 3 towers named after his wife, his brother, and a friend. The citadel was rebuilt and renovated by Suleiman the Magnificent in 1540, whilst he was rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. The Mount of Olives lies to the east of the old city. It is also known as the Mount of Anointment. On this mount, Jesus taught his disciples the Lord's Prayer and many parables, and foretold the destruction of Jerusalem. 40 days after his resurrection, Jesus took his disciples to the Mount of Olives and ascended into heaven. Its slopes are studded with churches commemorating events from the life of Jesus. The Chapel of the Ascension lies on the summit of the Mount of Olives. It is believed to be the spot from which Jesus ascended into heaven. Built by Constantine in 325 AD, it was destroyed by the Persians in 614 AD. Later rebuilt, but again destroyed by Sultan Hakem in 1009. In the 12th century, the Crusaders rebuilt the church, and in 1187, the church was transformed into a mosque. The Paternoster Church lies on the Mount of Olives to the south of the Chapel of the Ascension. It was built by Queen Helena, the mother of Constantine, and later destroyed by the Persians in 614 AD and rebuilt in 670. In 1009, the church was destroyed by Sultan Hakem. After the Crusaders left the country, the church was in ruins again. In 1600, it was marked only by a column. This is the site where Jesus taught his disciples the Lord's Prayer and many parables, and foretold the destruction of Jerusalem and the coming kingdom. The Lord's Prayer is written on the wall tiles in more than 60 languages. The Church of Gethsemane lies at the foot of the Mount of Olives in the Cedron Valley. It is also called the Church of All the Nations. It was built in 1924 upon the ruins of a Byzantine and a Crusader. The coats of arms of many nations can be seen. Since the whole world helped in building this basilica, it became known as the Church of All Nations. A mosaic adorns its facade, and statues of the 4 evangelists are set on pillars. On the main door, the emblems of the 4 evangelists can be seen. The Church of Gethsemane is built upon the Rock of Agony, on which Jesus knelt to pray his last prayers to God after the Last Supper and before Judas betrayed him. The apse above the altar is adorned with a mosaic of Christ praying at the Rock of the Agony whilst his disciples are sleeping. The Rock of the Agony is the main feature of the church. It is enclosed by a gilded railing. Gethsemane means oil press in Hebrew, Gat Shmanim. The garden is a place called Gethsemane, described by Matthew and by Mark, which was frequented by Jesus. It is a small garden with ancient Roman olive trees that still bear fruit. They seem to be the same trees under which Jesus prayed, or trees which sprang from the shoots of the older trees that witnessed Jesus' agony. According to Pliny, the olive tree does not die. Their age is undetermined. Some believe they may be 3,000 years old. The Church of the Assumption is erected upon the Virgin's tomb, which is reached by descending 45 steps. The first church was built by the Byzantines in the 5th century and was destroyed by the Persians in 614 AD. In 1130, the Crusaders rebuilt the church. In the 18th century, the possession of the church passed from the Franciscans to the Greeks and Armenians. The Cedron Valley divides the Mount of Olives to the east and the Old City to the west. It is also known as the Vale of Jehoshaphat. Part of it is known as the King's Gardens. According to Muslim and Jewish tradition, this is the place of the Last Judgment and of the resurrection of the dead. This pool was dug by King Hezekiah in 7 BC to ensure that Jerusalem would have in case of siege and war. Its source is the Virgin's Fountain. Jesus healed the blind man with its waters, as we read in the Gospel according to St. John. Rise, take up thy bed, and walk. The pool of Bethesda is the site of the miracle performed by Jesus on a Sabbath, where he cured the paralytic man who lay there for 38 years. The pool was cut in the rock and was one of many pools built to supply Jerusalem with water. It was rectangular in shape and was surrounded on all 4 sides by porches and by a 5th dividing the pool. The Church of St. Peter is built on the slopes of Mount Zion, over the grotto in which Jesus was imprisoned and over the ruins of the high priest's house, the house of Caiaphas. After his betrayal in Gethsemane, Jesus was bound and dragged to the high priest to be tried. While Jesus was tried, Peter denied him 3 times. Remembering the words of Jesus, "Before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice." Peter went out and cried. Thus the church is known as St. Peter in Gallicantu, where the cock crew. The cenacle marks the site where Jesus and his disciples celebrated the last Passover feast. Here Jesus washed the feet of his disciples and foretold his betrayal by one of them. Here Jesus appeared to the apostles on the evening of his resurrection and showed them his hands and his side. And here Jesus appeared to them again 8 days later. On Pentecost, tongues of head of each, and they were filled with the Holy Ghost and began to speak with many languages. King David's tomb is one of Judaism's holiest shrines, second in importance only to the Western Wall. It lies atop Mount Zion and is located under the cenacle. It was discovered by Rabbi Benjamin of Tudela in 1173. The tomb is covered with embroidered cloth, decorated with menorahs, crowns, and Torah scrolls. To the north of the Damascus Gate and outside the city walls is the Garden Tomb, believed by many Christians to be the place of crucifixion and burial of Jesus. The Garden Tomb was discovered by the British General Gordon in 1883. The tomb was not excavated until 1891. It was a Jewish tomb that dated back to the 1st century and was used as a Christian burial place. Byzantine crosses are found on the walls. The interior of the tomb gives an idea of how the tomb of Jesus might have looked. Calvary was discovered by General Gordon, who was a Bible student while on leave in Palestine. He was impressed by the shape of the hill that resembled a skull, and in time it became known as Gordon's Calvary. The hilltop is used as a Muslim cemetery. Ein Karim, a small village on the hillsides of Jerusalem, surrounded by trees and vineyards. According to the Gospel of St. Luke, Mary fled country with haste into a city of Judah. This was the home of Elizabeth and Zacharias the priest, and the traditional birthplace of John the Baptist. The Shrine of the Book was built especially to house the priceless Dead Sea Scrolls, the Bar Kokhba letters, and scroll fragments found at Masada. The roof of the shrine represents the lid of one of the clay jars in which the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. In the center of the shrine and upon a platform, the Book of Isaiah is displayed. The Knesset, Israel's parliament, stands on a hillside in West Jerusalem. It was completed and inaugurated in 1966. It is built with red Jerusalem stone. The Knesset comprises 120 members elected by the people. The Knesset's library has more than 50,000 volumes. Items of art decorate the chambers and the halls. A large menorah, or candelabra, which is the symbol of the State of Israel, faces the entrance. It depicts important events in the history of the Jewish people. While Jacob and Rachel, his second wife, were traveling from Beth-El to Ephrata, which is Bethlehem, Rachel died while giving birth to a son whom she called Ben-Omi, son of sorrow, but Jacob named him Benjamin, son of happy omen. Jacob buried her and set a pillar upon her tomb. The shrine contains a large cenotaph which covers the place of burial. The Crusaders built the shrine over the tomb. And thou, Bethlehem Ephrata, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet of thee shall he come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from the old, from the everlasting. Bethlehem is a small town in the Judean hills, south of Jerusalem. It was first mentioned in the Bible in connection with Rachel's death. Bethlehem was the home of Boaz and Ruth. David was born here and was anointed king of Israel by the prophet Samuel. Caesar Augustus commanded a census of all provinces under Roman rule, and this brought Joseph and Mary from Nazareth to his hometown, and Jesus was born to fulfill the prophecy of Micah. The three wise men from the east were led to Bethlehem by the star. The Basilica of the Nativity is the only church that escaped destruction by the Persians in 614 AD, due to mosaic showing the Magi in Persian clothing. In 135 AD, Christian faces were obliterated by Hadrian. and shrines dedicated to Roman gods were erected. A shrine over the grotto was dedicated to Adonis. The Basilica of the Nativity was built by Constantine in 325 AD. It was destroyed by the Samaritans during their revolt in 529 AD and later rebuilt by Justinian in 531 AD. During the Crusader rule, the basilica was restored and beautified. With the Turkish occupation in 1517, it was looted. During the British Mandate, excavations revealed the Constantine foundations and the mosaic floor of the basilica. The facade shows many entrances. All are walled up except for one, a very low one made during the Turkish rule to prevent horses and camels from entering the basilica. The Basilica of the Nativity is built upon the Grotto of the Nativity. It is rectangular in shape, and 44 Corinthian columns divide the basilica into 5 aisles. The roof was reconstructed in the 15th century and is covered with lead. Small patches of mosaic that once decorated the walls of the basilica can be seen in the north and south. The mosaic that covered the floor of the Constantine church is kept under wood coverings 3 feet below the new floor. This is the stable next to the inn where the Holy Family stayed while in Bethlehem. The grotto is rectangular and is lit by 32 lamps. The walls and floor are covered with marble. The grotto is divided into 2 parts: the place of birth and the Holy Manger. Beneath the altar of the Nativity, a silver star marks the birthplace of Jesus. The star is surrounded by a Latin inscription which reads, "Here Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary." The star was placed by the Roman Church in 1717. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger. Here came the 3 wise men from the east, guided by a star to worship Jesus, as did the shepherds. Opposite the manger, an altar was erected and dedicated to the 3 wise men, the Magi. Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill towards men. To the east of Bethlehem lies the village of the shepherds. Past the village is the field of Boaz, where Ruth the Moabite met her future husband Boaz, the great-grandfather of David. It is in these fields that the angel of God appeared to the shepherds tending their flocks, as described in the Gospel according to St. Luke. At this point, allow the cassette recording to run on to its very end. You can then reverse the cassette and hear and enjoy part 2.
The 3 pools of Solomon are hewn into the rock and partially built up. Their purpose was to collect the rainwater and the waters coming from a nearby spring. Herod built an aqueduct to supply Herodium with water, and Pontius Pilate built the great aqueduct that provided Jerusalem with water from these very pools. Hebron is one of the oldest cities in the Holy Land. It is over 4,000 years old. It has many names. In Hebrew, it is Kiryat Arba, the village of the 4. In Arabic, it is Al-Khalil, the friend. It was called the Castle of Abraham by the Crusaders. Hebron is revered by Jews and Muslims. It is associated with Abraham, who from Bethel pitched his tent and bought the cave of Machpelah. David was proclaimed king in Hebron and made it his capital for 7 years. Absalom made it his center of revolt against his father. Mamre is the place where Abraham pitched his tent and dug a well. Here Abraham was visited by the 3 angels of God and was promised a son. El was born here. So was his brother Isaac, who lived and died here. A Byzantine church dedicated to the Holy Trinity was built here in the 4th century. Abraham bought a piece of land and a cave from Ephron the Hittite, and the cave became the burial place for Abraham's family. This is the burial site of the patriarchs, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Leah. King Herod was the first to build a temple over the tombs. The cenotaphs are decorated and embroidered with verses from the Quran. They are covered with green tapestry for the patriarchs, crimson tapestry for their wives. The tombs of the patriarchs are beneath the mosque, and the cenotaphs stand over the exact burial places. Is a small village on the eastern slopes of the Mount of Olives. Bethany was occupied by the Jews upon their return from exile. Its original name was Bethania, and was built higher up in a field called the house of Simon the leper. Bethany was the home of Lazarus and his two sisters, Mary and Martha. It is the site of the last miracle performed by Jesus, when he raised Lazarus from the dead 4 days after his burial. The tomb of Lazarus is reached by descending 22 steps to a small antechamber. 3 more steps and a small opening lead to the actual tomb. A church was built upon the foundations of 2 former churches. It is decorated with mosaics depicting events that took place in Bethlehem. The Inn of the Good Samaritan stands halfway between Jerusalem and a crusader fortress stood on the nearby hill to protect the travelers. The Templars built a castle here and called it Malduin. The inn served as a caravan station. The Turks rebuilt it in 1903 as a police station. It was destroyed during the First World War in 1917. This is the traditional site of the parable of the Good Samaritan. The nomad tribes living in the desert, raising and tending their flocks. They move from one place to another, following water sources and grazing pastures. They live in tents woven from camel or goat hair, and usually dyed black, in order that they can be spotted from afar. Once a week, the Bedouin come from faraway distances to sell their cattle. In the Gospel of Quran, we read that a sheep market was located next to the Pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem. The main purpose of this market was to sell the cattle to be slaughtered and presented as sacrifices. 1,290 feet below sea level lies Jericho, the oldest city of the world. Situated in a fertile plain, rich with natural springs, making it in the desert. Jericho was destroyed by Joshua. Jesus, passing through Jericho, healed the 2 blind men, and stayed at the house of Zacchaeus, the chief of the publicans. Mark Antony presented Jericho to Cleopatra, who in turn leased it to Herod, who made it his winter residence until his death in 42 A.D. Stone, or ancient Jericho, was first mentioned in the Bible with the arrival of the Israelites in the 13th century B.C., who were led by Joshua after their exodus from Egypt. During the period of the Judges, Jericho was called the City of Palms. Near the old city of Jericho is the Fountain of Elijah, where Elijah cured the water by casting into it a handful of salt. The River Jordan runs through the great Syrian-African rift. It is 233 miles long, thus making it the longest river in the country. It is not navigable, no more than a muddy stream, and it discharges 5 million tons of water a day into the Dead Sea. The 3 springs, the Dun, the Banyas, and the Hasbani, descending from the snow-capped Mount Hermon in the north, unite to make the River Jordan. Many miracles were performed at this river, and Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist in its waters. Immediately after his baptism in the River Jordan by John the Baptist, Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, where he fasted for 40 days and nights, and was tempted by the devil twice on the mountain, and once in Jerusalem on the pinnacle of the temple. The Dead Sea is a part of the Syrian-African rift. It is 1,290 feet below sea level, making it the lowest spot on Earth. 48 miles long from north to south, and 10 miles across at its widest point. Its depth is 1,300 feet. Life is impossible in the Dead Sea. This salty lake marks the end of the River Jordan, and it is a rich source of minerals. Qumran, lying to the northwest of the Dead Sea, was a fortress in the Iron Age. It was occupied by a religious sect of Jews, the Essenes, who originated in Mesopotamia and lived far away from the cities. The Essenes regarded themselves as the sons of light, the others being the sons of darkness. They abandoned the place after the great earthquake of 31 BC, returning in the 4th century to rebuild their settlement. In 68 to 69 AD, the Romans destroyed the place, but the Essenes saved their most valuable treasures and their library by hiding them in the surrounding caves. It was in these caves that the Essenes hid their treasures when they were attacked by the Romans. In 1947, 2 shepherds discovered by chance a cave high on a hill. This cave contained jars, and one of the jars contained the 7-meter-long scroll of the Book of Isaiah, now on display in the shrine of the book. Many fragments, linen, and pottery were discovered. In all, 900 fragments of skin and papyrus were found. In another cave, 2 copper scrolls were found with Hebrew letters. The Dead Sea Scrolls are one of the greatest treasures of the world. The scrolls were made from different kinds of material, some of sheepskin, while others were of papyrus, and some of copper. The scrolls are copies of the Bible. Due to the hot and dry desert climate, the scrolls were miraculously preserved. The Book of Isaiah was found nearly complete. Some psalms which were unknown have been found too. There are bits of nearly every book of the Old Testament. More scrolls were found in 1951. They were from the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, written in Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. They belonged to Bar Kokhba's soldiers. Bar Kokhba was the leader of the Second Jewish Revolt against Rome. 2 copper scrolls were found with traces of Hebrew letters. They are kept in the museum at Amman. After deciphering, they revealed the hiding places of the treasures of the Essenes. It is said that Herod prepared this fortress as a refuge in time of need against the 2 dangers which he had always envisaged. The one, that the Jewish people might depose him and put a king from the royal house which had reigned before him on the throne. And the second, even worse than the first, the fear of Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. Thus wrote Josephus Flavius. Masada, 4 kilometers from the Dead Sea, 400 meters above Dead Sea level, was first built by the high priest Jonathan between 103 and 76 BC. The work at the summit was done by Herod from 40 to 4 BC and was occupied by his family until 66 AD. In 66 AD, it was occupied by a party of Jewish zealots. The Jewish revolt, which began in 66 AD, ended in 70 with the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus. In 73 AD, Masada fell to the Roman legion after a long siege, its people preferring to kill themselves rather than surrender to the Romans. Masada was occupied by the Romans from 73 to 111 AD. This was Herod's private villa. It stood on the northern side, which was the highest. It was built on 3 terraces, one above the other. The upper terrace, which was 110 feet above the lower terrace, served as the living quarters. The walls and ceiling were decorated with frescoes. The floor was paved with black and white mosaics. This part of the villa was also used by the Byzantine monks. The middle terrace was 40 feet above the lower terrace, and supporting walls still stand. They were decorated with frescoes. The courtyard of the lower terrace is surrounded by 2 rows of columns of the Corinthian order. The walls were decorated with frescoes. Steps on the east side led to a steam bath. This church dates back to the 5th century and was built by the monks who lived here in Masada. Its walls were decorated with stones set in plaster, and the windows were of stained glass, whilst its floor was decorated with mosaics. On his return from Mesopotamia with his family and flocks, Jacob bought a piece of land, pitched his tent, erected a pillar, and named it El, God of Israel. Then he dug a well. To this day it is known as Jacob's Well. The well is 120 feet deep, and its water still drinkable. The church around the well was built by the Greek Orthodox Church. This is the place where Jesus met the Samaritan woman and invited her to drink. Mount Gerizim is the center of the Samaritans, who believe that this is Mount Moriah. On the top of this mount, Samaritans celebrate the feasts of Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles, and reenact the slaughtering of the lamb as the Hebrews did in Egypt. The Samaritans are the descendants of the marriage of the remaining tribes of Israel and the Babylonian conquerors. Their religion is very close to the Jewish faith. They believe in the 5 books of Moses and treasure an ancient Torah scroll, 3,500 years old, making it the most ancient manuscript in the world. Their language is Samaritan, which is similar to ancient Hebrew. The high priest presides over their religious ceremonies. He is head of the community. Samaritans claim that Abraham's sacrifice actually took place on Mount Gerizim. Samaritans today number about 400, the majority living in Nablus, ancient Shem, and they are one of the smallest religious sects in the world. Sebastia was built by Omri, the 6th king of Israel. He bought a hill from Shemer, built a city and named it Samaria after Shemer, and made it his capital. Ahab, Omri's son, beautified and fortified the city and built the temple of Baal to his Phoenician wife, Jezebel. Sebastia fell to the Assyrians in 722 BC, and its people were exiled to Babylon. In 331 BC, Alexander the Great destroyed the city. In 63 BC, Pompey rebuilt Sebastia. Augustus Caesar bestowed it upon Herod, who enlarged and beautified it, naming it Sebastia after Augustus Caesar, Augustus Sebasti in Greek. It was destroyed by the Persians in 614 AD, later to be rebuilt by the Crusaders. This is the fertile valley of Jezreel, the plain of Esdraelon, the valley of Armageddon. This valley was an important strategic point that commanded the commercial highways. We read in the book of Revelations that this valley is the place where the last battle between good and evil shall be fought. Megiddo, overlooking the Jezreel Valley, was the command post that guarded the Via Maris, the ancient commercial route that connected Mesopotamia in the east with Syria in the north and Egypt in the south. Due to its strategic importance, Megiddo was inhabited 5,000 years ago. It is probable that the Canaanites built the first town in the year 20 BC. Solomon rebuilt Megiddo into a chariot city and built the stables that housed 500 horses. Recent excavations in Megiddo exposed the ruins of 20 cities, built one over the other, the earliest dating back to 4000 BC, the latest to 400 BC. Excavations of the old Canaanite temples with altars, the water system, the city gate, and the stables. This tunnel was dug by hand. It is similar to the one that was dug by King Hezekiah in Jerusalem. Its main purpose was to supply the city with water during sieges and battles that were fought in the Vale of Jezreel. Nazareth, unknown in the Old Testament, was first mentioned in the New Testament when the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary. Nazareth was the home of Joseph and Mary. After they returned from Egypt, the Holy Family settled in Nazareth, where Jesus was brought up. Being unaccepted in Nazareth, Jesus went to Capernaum and made it his city. The Basilica of the Annunciation was built by the Vatican. It is believed to be the largest basilica outside of Rome. It was consecrated in 1969. The basilica stands over the ruins of the Byzantine church that was built by Constantine. It is built over the grotto of the Annunciation where the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary. This is the interior of the basilica, with two churches built one over the other. The lower church is built upon the foundations of the Crusader Basilica. In the middle of this church is the grotto. The upper church is connected with the lower church by a stairway. It rises 7.5 meters above the level of the lower church, and the cupola rises up to 55 meters. The focal point of the church is the altar. A huge mosaic decorates the wall behind. A railing surrounds the Holy Grotto, which is the main feature of the basilica. Two pillars stand on each side of the altar in the grotto. In front of the grotto is another altar. To its right is the apse of the Byzantine church. The columns standing in front of the grotto are Crusader columns. Mary's well is also known as the Fountain of Mary. According to apocryphal Gospels, this was the site where the angel appeared to Mary for the first time while she was drawing water from the well. The synagogue church is located in the marketplace. This Greek Catholic church is built upon the site of the ancient synagogue where Jesus taught. Now stands to the north of Nazareth. It is the site of the first miracle performed by Jesus, turning the water into wine. Two churches commemorate the event. The Orthodox Church has two big stone pitchers that are believed to be two of the 6 water pots that were used at the wedding. The Franciscan Church was built over the ruins of a Crusader church. Tiberias, on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, is a resort town with hot springs and baths. It was built by Herod Antipas between 18 and 22 AD and was named after the Roman Emperor Tiberius. It was built in the Roman style. After the destruction of Jerusalem, Tiberias became an important Jewish center of learning and became one of the 4 sacred cities of the Jews. Tiberias was occupied by the Arabs in 637 AD. It was captured by those in 1099, but soon fell to Saladin in 1187 after the Battle of Hittin. The Sea of Galilee is the largest freshwater lake in the country. Like the Dead Sea, it also lies in the Syrian-African Rift. It has many names: the Sea of Tiberias, the Sea of Jesus, Kinneret, Gennesaret, or the Galilee. On its shores, Jesus began preaching and performed many of his miracles. Jesus walked upon its waters, and Jesus helped Peter to catch the big draught of fish. A storm raged while Jesus slept and threatened to sink the boat. The storm subsided at his command. By its shores, Jesus fed the 5,000 and called Peter, Andrew, James, and John in. Capernaum was not mentioned in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament it was an important city. Being on the borders, it was a commercial center with a customs house and a Roman garrison. Jesus, being unaccepted in his hometown Nazareth, made Capernaum his home. Capernaum is the site of many miracles performed by Jesus. Here he healed a man possessed of an unclean, cured Peter's mother-in-law, and a man sick of palsy, and the centurion's servant. Here he raised from the dead the daughter of Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue. In Capernaum, Jesus called Matthew to follow him. Capernaum was cursed by Jesus for not accepting him, and was ruined with Bethsaida and Chorazin. Tabcha derives its name from the Greek word heptapegon, or the 7 springs. Of the 7 springs, only 5 remain. This is the site of the miracle of feeding the 5,000. The Church of the Multiplication stands upon this site, upon the remains of an older church. Between the altar and the apse is the mosaic representing a basket of 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Built on the shore of the Sea of Galilee and dedicated to St. Peter, this chapel is known as Mensa Christi, the table of Christ. Jesus appeared to his disciples on the shores of the Sea of Galilee for the 3rd time after his resurrection and dined with them. He asked Peter 3 times if he loved him. Reassured, Jesus spoke. The Mount of Beatitudes lies to the north of Tabgha. It is the scene of the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. This is the site where Jesus appointed his 12 disciples. The Church of the Beatitudes was built to commemorate this event. The church is octagonal in shape, recalling the 8 Beatitudes. Mount Tabor soars about 1,650 feet above the valleys. Tabor, like Carmel and Hermon, was mentioned many times in the Old Testament. A steep and winding road leads to Mount Tabor. A fortress was built on the summit in the 13th century. The plateau of the mount is divided into 2 parts by a wall running from east to west. The northern part belongs to the Greek Orthodox Church, who built a church dedicated to St. Elias, that is, Elijah, and the southern part belongs to the Franciscans, who built a basilica. Mount Tabor is believed to be the Mount of Transfiguration. The Basilica of the Transfiguration stands on the southern part of Mount Tabor. It is built on the lines of ancient Roman Syrian architecture. The basilica has 3 naves. A flight of steps leads to the crypt, where the ancient walls and the altar can be seen. Acre was an important port from which the Crusaders landed. It was an important Phoenician port. It later became King Solomon's chariot city. It is also known as Acre, St. Jean d'Arc. Acre's history begins with the Crusaders when Baldwin I captured the city in 1104 after 20 days of siege. Acre surrendered to Saladin in 1187 after the Battle of Hippin. After fierce battles, it fell back to the Crusaders in 1191. Because they were unable to conquer Jerusalem, Acre was made the capital of the Latin kingdom. Ahmed al-Jazar defended the city when Napoleon besieged it in 1799. In 1831, it was captured by the Egyptian general Ibrahim Pasha. The mosque is built upon Acre's Cathedral of the Holy Cross. It was built by Ahmed al-Jazar in 1718. It is one of the largest mosques in the country. It houses the sarcophagi of Ahmed al-Jazar and of his successor, Suleiman. Caesarea was a small Phoenician city known as Straton Tower, built in the 3rd century BC. In 25 BC, Herod built the city and named Caesarea after Caesar Augustus. 10 years after his death, it became the seat of the Roman procurators or governors. Excavations revealed many important finds, the latest being an inscription bearing the very name of Pontius Pilate. Caesarea was visited by Peter, where he baptized Cornelius, the Roman centurion. Paul also visited the city and testified before the governor. He was imprisoned for 2 years and later deported to Rome in chains. Caesarea was built on the sand dunes and did not have any water source. King Herod built this vast aqueduct to bring water to his coastal palace from the springs at the foot of Mount Carmel. Haifa is the capital of the north. It is the 3rd largest city in the country and its major port. Haifa is built upon the slopes of Mount Carmel. It was on Mount Carmel that the prophet Elijah built his altar and confronted the prophets and priests of Baal. Saladin captured the city in 1187. It was destroyed after the fall of Acre in 1291. One of the important landmarks of Haifa is the Baha'i shrine with its golden dome. The shrine houses the remains of Mirza Ali Muhammad, a Persian, and one of the founders of the Baha'i faith. Haifa is the world center of the Baha'i religion. Tel Aviv, or the Hill of Spring, was founded in 1909 on the sand dunes north of Jaffa. Tel Aviv is Israel's commercial, industrial, and cultural center. Jaffa, one of the oldest cities in the world, was the port for Jerusalem. The cedar wood from Lebanon for building the temple was unloaded in this port. It was from this port that Jonah sailed for Tarshish. Here Peter raised Tabitha from the dead and stayed at the house of Simon the tanner. Banias, with its waterfall and springs, is one of the sources of the river Jordan. Banias is derived from the Greek word Panea, or Pan, the god of the shepherds. Herod built a temple of white marble, and later gave it to his son Philip, who built a city and named it after Caesar Tiberius. Herod Agrippa II named it Neronius, after Nero. Titus celebrated his victory here after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Banias is the site where Peter confessed of Jesus as, "Thou art the Christ." Mount Hermon stands to the northeast of the Sea of Galilee. It borders Israel, Syria, and Lebanon. Mount Hermon is the highest mountain in the region. This snow-capped mountain is the source that feeds the streams that unite to make the River Jordan. The three streams, the Banias, the Hatzbani, and the Dan. To the south, the peninsula of Sinai is the gateway from Africa to Asia, the bridge between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Sinai has always been one of the world's most important crossroads. The Via Maris that connected Egypt with Mesopotamia followed the Mediterranean coastline of Sinai. Sinai is a broad plateau of limestone. To the south is a moonscape of granite mountains, including the Mount of Moses, the holy peak, where Moses received the tablets of the law with the Ten Commandments. The children of Israel crossed Sinai on their way from bondage in Egypt and wandered here for 40 years before they reached the Promised Land. The monastery of St. Catherine was built in the 6th century AD on the traditional site of the burning bush. It was built in the form of a fortress. The monastery houses some 3,000 ancient manuscripts and 2,000 rare icons. To the east of the Dead Sea lies Mount Nebo, the most prominent peak of the Moabite range. The cave in which Moses was buried is located under the church, because Mount Nebo marks the spot where Moses once stood and viewed the Promised Land without entering. And on Mount Nebo, our tour in sight and sound of the Holy Land comes to an end.